Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everybody to the Safina Society Nothing But Facts live stream on a crispy, sunny Tuesday in the great state of New Jersey. As you all know, we stream live from the La Cocina Dawah Center in the middle of New Brunswick, actually on the edge of New Brunswick, but it feels like you're in the middle of town, right down the street from Robert Wood Johnson Medical Center and the Children's Hospital and the State University of New Jersey, Rutgers, which is in fact the biggest university in the country in terms of population, always rivaling with Ohio State, but we've outstripped Ohio State in terms of the number of students. Not that that's a big deal, but it is a very lively city here in New Brunswick. It's got a big train station, a lot of students, a lot of grad students, massive university hospital. And wherever you have a university hospital, you have a lot of action. So it's a beautiful area to be streaming out of. And today we're going to be talking to one of the ulama that I believe everybody here should be studying with. Take his classes with Basira and learn ilm al-Kalam. And we had he came up in the podcast with Sheikh Yasir Qadi and Sheikh Asrar Rashid, in which Sheikh Asrar Rashid said he didn't believe in anything called Kalam 3.0. And I think it was sort of a minor difference on whether or not there was a clear or unclear gradient, continuation. Nonetheless, we will have Kalam scholar himself with us, Shaykh Hamza Karamalli. He is with us on the program today, live from Istanbul. He studied with Sheikh Hassan Hito, who was one of the students of Sheikh Saeed Ramadan al-Bulti. He studied with, sorry, one of the peers. Well, you can bring him on now, Omar. Welcome to the program, Sheikh Hassan Karamalli. While I do a quick intro, he's one of the, Sheikh Hassan Hito was a peer of Sheikh Saeed Ramadan al-Bulti, and he studied mainly with ulama al-Sham, who are, without doubt, the flag bearers of ilm al-Kalam, really since the past 100 years, several hundred years, I should say. And it's an honor to have you on with us. Sheikh Hamza Karamalli, welcome to the Safina Society Nothing But Facts live stream.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Let us begin with straight on the issue. I'm a regular guy. I don't know much. Why do I need the medicine that you're offering?
That's a good question. So, I'm also a bit curious though. So maybe we can start with, I heard that you sent a reconnaissance mission to find out Kalam 3.0. So what motivated you to do that?
One of our, we have a brother who's part of our community. He's actually coming out with a book on the problem of evil. And he loves ilm al-Kalam. Yeah. And he said, look at this program. Look at this new class. Okay. He said, I want to take it. I'm thinking of taking it. I said, not you thinking, you should take it, and we'll sponsor you to take that class. And we basically want to keep stimulating ilm and knowledge of kalam. And especially ilm al-Kalam is something that has to be, in a sense, there is an update. It's always updated because it's a response to fitan. Insofar as the atheist philosophers come up with new tricks, we have to have the answers. And that's why we believed in constantly getting every new book, every new course on the matter of responding to these attacks on Islam. That was
What was the feedback that you...
Well, he was blown away. He was totally blown away. Maybe we should, hey, Omar, see if we can bring Naz on. Naz wants to be part of this. Yeah, inshallah. Because he was so excited, then he sent us basically the minute by minute of the program and of the course. And that's why we ended up promoting it here on the stream. And he basically said that really everyone who leads a halaqah, everyone who teaches a course, everyone who is an imam in a masjid, everybody who will ever deal with Muslims, Western Muslims, even it's global now, must learn what's being taught here.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, I'm very happy to hear that. Yes, Kalam is the most important science. When you read any science, like all of this scholars, they always say like, this is the definition of this science and it's the most important science because of XYZ. But I think like the Kalam people, like mutakallimun, it's really the most important science because Kalam, it's the science that helps you bring about Iman in the hearts of other people. And without Iman, there's nothing. Without Iman, there's no prayer. Without Iman, there's no fasting. Without Iman, there's no Sufism. Without Iman, there's no spirituality. Mustafa Sabri, who I consider to be one of the greatest mutakallimun of the modern age, he was the last Shaykh al-Islam of the Ottoman Empire. He wrote a magnificent work called Mawqif al-Aql wal-Ilm wal-Alam. And he lamented this. He said that the problem that we have now is that we are giving exhortations, we are trying to inspire people to pray, but they don't believe. And this is something that I discovered firsthand. I've been involved with youth since I was a teenager myself. I used to lead youth halaqas many decades ago. Not that many actually, I'm not that old, but a couple of decades ago. And parents used to come to me, they used to say that my son isn't praying, my daughter doesn't wear hijab, can you make them have good company and play basketball and have a picnic? And we used to do all those things. But over the years, and I'm sure that you've seen this too, everybody's seen this, the problems have now changed. Now it's not like they don't pray, it's they don't believe. They're not Muslim, right? They've left Islam. And whenever that happens, it's unfortunate that it's a very ugly ending. It ends up, the parents get defensive, the imam gets defensive, the scholar says, how dare you ask that question? It's rude, because they don't know how to answer, right? And when they don't know how to answer, and the questions are good, they're strong, they're intellectual, and the person who's asking the question feels rebuffed, and they feel that Muslims, they don't believe based on evidence, they don't think. So, I think the most important science that we need to revive is called Asluddin. Kalam Asluddin. It's the foundation of Deen. The most important science to revive is the science of Kalam. So, the science of Kalam, we talk about, Kalam is now becoming. It's strange. It's now becoming fashionable. When I started studying it, 2 decades ago, it was controversial, but now it's cool, Kalam is cool. But what is it? What exactly is Kalam? Kalam is the definition of the science of Kalam. It's علم يقتدر به على إثبات العقائد الدينية عن أدلتها اليقينية. It's a science that enables you to prove the religious creed true from their certain incontrovertible arguments. So it's a science that enables you to show that Islam is true. And so Kalam, actually, it's not for the masses. And I think like you brought that out very nicely in your question when you said, what's the medicine, right? Because the role is that it's a science. Kalam is a science that's studied, and there's people who become experts in it. And then they have medicines, and these medicines, they employ these medicines. When somebody comes with a shubha, when somebody comes with a doubt, they use their training to answer these questions, to remove the doubt, and help them come to their own realizations that Islam is true. But it actually has I think that it's often misunderstood in our times as being a defensive science. That you wait for somebody to come with a doubt, and then you respond. But in its original formulation, it's for ithbat. It's for ithbatul aqaid ad-diniya. It's for affirming the aqaid diniya. And the mutakallimun, they have a discussion at the beginning of the books of Kalam on the iman of the muqallid. And is it sahih or is it not sahih? They say it is sahih. But the dominant position amongst the mutakallimun, and it represents the majority of the scholars of al-Sunna wal Jama'ah, is that there is an aspect of ilmul kalam that is personally obligatory on everyone, because it's not permissible to do taqleed. It's not permissible to be Muslim just because you're born into a Muslim family, just because the imam of your masjid is Muslim. Because if that happens, then your iman is going to shake. It's going to waver. you're going to be susceptible to doubts. So in the Jawhara, Imam al-Laqani, he said, famous line, he said, إِذْ كُلُّ مَنْ قَلَّدَ فِي التَّوْحِيدِ إِيمَانُهُ لَمْ يَخْلُ مِنْ تَرْدِيدِ. Everybody who has taqleed, who merely believes based on imitation without coming to their own personal realization that this is a truth. This is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is haqq. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam haqq. Al-jannatu haqq. Al-naru haqq. Without coming to that realization themselves, imanuhu lam yakhlu min tardidi. That his iman will always have some kind of a hesitation, some kind of a doubt, a difficulty will come. They'll say, does God really exist? And so there's a widespread problem of a cultural iman being born into a culture. And we need to change that into an iman that is based on a personal conviction. And the science that enables us to do that is the science of Kalam, and that's why it's important.
Now, let me open up some topics, and then we're going to branch from that. The first topic is the question of that some people imagine that there are new concepts. Kalam adds new ideas to Islamic creed, and that can't be right because the Prophet came with the final creed. Nobody should alter anything. But we find in Kalam books concepts and terms that we don't find in the words of the Sahaba. How do you answer that question? That how could you tell me something is necessary? Perhaps you're even saying obligatory by Sharia when we don't find these words, terms, concepts, notions in the words of the companions.
Yeah, it's excellent question. And that's not specific to Kalam, it's general with all of the sciences. So in the science of hadith, we have al-jarh wa ta'dil, we have sahih, we have da'if, we have mawdu', we have all kinds of terms in the science of hadith that were not used by the companions. The companions didn't need to use them because they don't need to see whether a sanad is sahih. The Prophet is right there. So
Correct.
They heard from himself. So over time, there are conditions that developed, and we needed to verify the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the scholars of hadith, they developed a rational science. People don't realize, they think that hadith is naqli. Hadith, the science of hadith, is a rational science that was invented by the Muslims. It's one of the sciences that sets us apart from all other religious traditions, right? So we have isnad, we have i'rab, and we have ansab. And the same could be said of the science of fiqh, the same could be said of the science of grammar, and the same is said of the science of kalam. It's a science that developed over time in response to particular problems that arose at that time. So when Greek philosophy entered into the Muslim world, then people, they started to learn it, they started to teach it, they started to translate it, and it was a sophisticated science that had its terms, that had its concepts. And in order for Muslims to respond to these questions that were causing doubts, shubuhat, causing people to have grave problems in their iman, even leave iman altogether, they had to speak to them in a language that they could understand. So in our times, when somebody comes and says, I don't believe in God because of atoms and molecules and laws of nature, then we have to talk about atoms and molecules and laws of nature, and that's going to be part of the science of Kalam today. Even though the Prophet ﷺ and the companions didn't use those terms. So in the same way, the science of Kalam, it was speaking to people who were being confused by certain words, by certain concepts. And so the scholars, they had to understand what's being said. They had to understand the objection, and they had to sift their way through it and say that, okay, this is right, this is wrong, this is the reason why it's wrong. And that's how the science of Kalam developed. The science of Kalam is a conversation. It's an intellectual conversation that our scholars have had with people for a very long time. And it's something we should be proud of. because, like that conversation, you don't find it in Christianity. Because in Christianity, if somebody said something that's heretical, you burn their books and you burn them on the stake. And so now you don't know what they said. There's so many heresies that you find, you have no idea what they believed in. But for us, the Mu'tazila, you know what they believed in. You know their arguments. And they're studied to death, and they are still taught, and then you respond to them. The same with the Falasifa, same with all of these things, these other sects and groups. So it's really something I think that we should be proud of.
So it's funny that you actually may end up being able to say something that would sound so ludicrous, which is that next time somebody says, what's the soundness of that hadith? What's the grade of that hadith? You could also just say, hey, listen, the Sahaba never said this.
Yeah.
No companion ever asked for a chain or verified hadith. But just by use of logic, when a problem developed and liars began to develop in Islamic history very early on, then great scholars from the second generation, like Muhammad ibn Sirin, began to say things like, name your men, right? Which is like, verify the hadith. Tell me who told you this hadith. And that is one of the first types of necessary innovations that we could say or necessary developments in the transmission of the Sunnah. No Sahabi ever said it because he didn't have to. Likewise, no Sahabi ever had to defend Islamic creed from an atheist, because there weren't atheists in the Arabian Peninsula, right? There were pagans and Jews in the Arabian Peninsula, and probably very few Christians. Now, let's go to even something more fundamental. What is the meaning of the word kalam? What does that word mean? And it doesn't seem like it has anything connected to defending Islamic beliefs, because if we say the science of hadith, we know it's the science of prophetic words, the words of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Fiqh, understanding, so it's understanding the law. But seems like kalam, the word does not match with the topic. So why is it called ilm al-kalam?
Yeah, it's like nahu, right? So they have a discussion of why nahu is called nahu. Nahu means a direction. And they say that Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said, unhu hadha nahwa, go this way. He gave an initial exposition of nahu to Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali. And so it came to have that name. So sometimes the name of a science does not reflect what's actually being done, but it reflects a statement that someone made regarding it, or it reflects a famous problem. So there's actually, we're not sure why the science of kalam was called the science of kalam. Kalam means speech. Kalam means speech. And in his Sharh al-Aqaid, Imam al-Taftazani, Sharh al-Aqaid, the most important work of kalam ever written in the history of kalam. So he studied all over all the seminaries, like 50, 60 hashiyas on it. Hashiyas have hashiyas on it. So he has an important discussion in the beginning where he says that if kalam means speech, why is this science, which has to do with arguments for the truth of Islam, why was it called kalam? And so he gives many reasons, and that shows that he's not sure. So he just mentions possibilities. So here are some possibilities. One possibility is that there was a famous debate between the Mu'tazila and Ahmad ibn Hanbal over the issue of kalam, the speech of God. So the Mu'tazila, they said that the Quran, kalamullah, is created, and the Ahmad ibn Hanbal, along with Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, he said that al-Quranu kalamullah ghayru makhluq. The Quran in the meaning of the speech of God, it's ataf bayan, Quran in the meaning of the speech of God is ghayr makhluq. And so there was a famous inquisition, there was a Mu'tazilite inquisition, and so it was something that it was a turning point in our intellectual history, and really important. All of the ulama were involved, and it involved the Mu'tazila, who used rational arguments. And so this science, it came to be known as the science of kalam. This is an important issue related to it.
So it's named after this topic of kalamullah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Other opinion was that when the early scholars of Kalam, they used to write their books, they used to put subheadings. They would say, Al-Kalamu fi kaza.
Okay.
Al-Kalamu fi kaza. Like talking
Speech.
about, yeah. So then it came to be known as the science of Kalam. Others, they said that it's something that enables you to speak. Because when a Mu'tazili comes or a Faylosuf comes, he says all these things, everybody else is like, what do I say? I don't understand. But if you learn this, it enables you to speak. And there's other positions as well. Yeah.
I like the concept that the subject is about logic, the logic of why these beliefs are sound, and yet you never know someone's logic until they talk, right?
Yeah.
So that may be a link. So is there a link between speech? Because the word kalam, for those who are non-Arabic speakers, the word kalam literally means words, or speech, I should say. Speech.
Yeah.
And mantiq is logic. So in our talk today, these two Arabic words you need to know. Mantiq is the study of logic. Kalam is speech. So is there a link between kalam and mantiq?
Yeah, so this actually excellent question, right? So it goes back to logic itself. The word logic in English comes from Greek logos, and logos is logic, mind. It's also the word. So Christians talk about the word and all. It's logos. So in Christianity, or actually in English or Greek rather, the word for logic and the word for speech, the mind, they're related. So mantiq also means speech. In the Quran, Sayyidina Sulaiman, he says, "Ulimna mantiq at-tayr." We were taught the speech of birds. And so mantiq means speech. And in the famous versification by Akhdari, he said, وَبَعْدُ فَالْمَنْطِقُ لِلْجَنَانِ نِسْبَتُهُ كَالنَّحْوِ لِلْلِسَانِ. He says that mantiq to the mind is like grammar to the tongue. So there's a relation between speech and between thought. And that comes in logic, that in English, it comes in mantiq, in Arabic. And kalam, it's also, I think it's related, definitely related, because in order to speak, you have to think.
And in some colloquial speech, kalam refers to logic, because if someone gives a speech, right, people praise his kalam. They're not necessarily praising. They say like, I like his kalam. What they're actually saying is, I like the argument that he's making. They're not saying his words.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah.
So now that we've covered some of these basics, now let's ask the question of how are there three eras of kalam in the history of this subject? Who are the what are the three issues or reasons that there are these eras? Who are the villains behind these eras?
So I called Kalam, my inshallah new book that'll hopefully come out, called it Kalam 3.0. And this name is inspired by Sharh al-Aqaid of Imam al-Taftazani, in which he says in his book that there's two phases of kalam. He says there's the kalam al-mutaqaddimin and there's the kalam al-mutaakhirin. There's the kalam of the early scholars of kalam and there's the kalam of the late scholars of kalam. And he said that the kalam of the early scholars, this is kalam 1.0, it was developed in response to the Mu'tazila. So the Mu'tazila, these people, they're actually the first mutakallimun, and this is to be fair to them, right? So the Mu'tazila, because what is kalam? The essence of kalam is that you use your mind and you engage in rational inquiry and you make formal arguments. So the Mu'tazila, they used to make formal arguments because they studied Greek philosophy and they did a lot of good things. They wrote a lot of good books. They defended the Muslims against many other religions and many other philosophies. And that's actually why they rose in the court ranks during the reign of the Abbasids, because the Abbasids, they wanted somebody to defend the faith because their whole their government was based on faith. So But although they did this, they had a couple of mistakes, a couple of previous mistakes. They made mistakes. And so in response to the Mu'tazila, in order to correct these mistakes, this is where Ilmul Kalam was born. And there were two great scholars of Kalam, Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. And these two scholars of Kalam, they both engaged with the Mu'tazilite mistakes, they corrected them. And so this was Kalam 1.0. The Mu'tazilite, their system, logical system, was pretty good. But at this stage, most of the confusions were scriptural. They had to do with the interpretations of Quranic verses. Like, for example, seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the afterlife. Is that possible? Is that not? The Mu'tazilites, they said that it's impossible to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the afterlife because that would mean that he is a physical object. And so there are verses in the Quran and hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that are very explicit about this. They negated them. And it's not permissible to negate something from scripture. So this created a controversy. And so the scholars of hadith and Quran, they said, well, they're going against the Quran and Sunnah, but you needed someone to understand their reasoning and speak to them and correct, identify, okay, this is where you went wrong. And the early mutakallimun, they did that. And they said on this issue, for example, they said that sight is a perception that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates within us vis-a-vis something that exists. In this life, he creates it within us vis-a-vis physical objects that occupy space and time. In the next life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will create it within us vis-a-vis himself, and it's even though he does not exist in space, he does not exist in time. وَمِنْهُ أَنْ يُرَى بِالْأَبْصَارِ لَكِنْ بِلَا كَيْفٍ وَلَا انْحِصَارٍ in the Jawhara, that he will be seen among the things that are obligatory, that he will be seen, but without resembling anything else and without any encompassment. So they went back and forth, and so this is the nature of the early Kalam. This is Kalam 1.0.
Okay.
Then,
Question now on this.
Yeah.
Now, to give people a quick summary on some of the context, the Sahaba, the Khilafah of the Sahaba ended. The Umayyad dynasty began. The Umayyads were not very much concerned with matters of knowledge. The Abbasids took over 88 or so years after the Umayyads. The Abbasids loved knowledge, and they wanted to defend Islam. Now, they eventually came to sponsor and encourage this group, which became called Mu'tazilites, and the Mu'tazilites were defending the faith. But against whom? Who are the Mu'tazilites defending the faith against?
Okay, that's really good. And let me just clarify one thing, which is that the Umayyads, they were interested in knowledge, but at that phase, the knowledge that they were interested in was the knowledge of hadith.
Gathering
because
hadith.
the first step, so Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he commanded Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri and others, and Imam Malik and this is gonna get to your mashallah, very insightful question, that there is in the era of the Umayyads, it's just after the companions. So the companions, they have the nur of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the strong iman of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that they disseminate amongst the people that they meet. So in a society that has this strong iman, they're not going to have any major aqida issues. They're going to be busied with worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the first thing they're going to say is, well, how do I figure out what the Prophet said and what he didn't say?
Yes,
and so that's the concern. Then as distance grows long, that nur becomes weaker and weaker. And as the nur becomes weaker and weaker, there's more serious aqida issues that begin to emerge, and those emerged in the time of the Abbasids. And so they busied themselves with engaging with these ideas. And so your question was, who were they speaking to? So they were, when the Muslims, when they So the capital of the Muslims, the first capital of the Muslims was Medina, al-Madina al-Munawwara. May the blessings and peace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be on its blessed inhabitants. And then it moved from al-Madina to al-Kufa in the time of Sayyidina Ali. And then it moved from Kufa to Damascus, which is the capital of the Umayyads. And when it moves to Damascus, Damascus is, I think, it's like the longest continually
city.
And so it has many different civilizations. It has a rich history of Christian theology, and Christian theology merged with Greek philosophy. So Muslims, when they went into these towns, they were initially a minority, and they were actually a minority for a very long time. There's a really good book, what's it called? There's a really good book that studies conversion history. The name will come to me. Let me know if you remember. But it makes these curves of conversion, how long it took for people to become Muslim. It took a very long time. So Muslims were because Muslims didn't force people to convert. So they when they're in Damascus, there's a very large Christian population. And this Christian population is in the court. They're governing with the Muslims. They're ministers. They're learning from them. And there's natural conversations that happen between them. So, and with these conversations, Muslims comes to learn these new ideas that they weren't aware of before. And these ideas are couched in philosophical language. And so they begin to learn to have conversations. And this formal structured argument, it takes you to certain conclusions that aren't correct, and so now you need to deal with it. And so this is why the Abbasids and the scholars at that time, they began studying these sciences. There's also actually another reason is that today we understand the importance of studying math and science and all of the modern sciences, because we need doctors, we need scholars. Scholars are more important than doctors and engineers. But we need doctors to treat people physically, and so we need people who are going to go and study these things. And so in that time, the equivalent of the modern university was Aristotle and his organon. And so if you wanted to study science, you studied Aristotle, you studied physics, you studied botany, you studied all of these things, and it was merged with all of these ideas. And so the Muslims need to study medicine. They need to study like the science and technology of that time. So, and this is very analogous to what's happening today. So they were forced to engage with these ideas. And so that's how the Mu'tazila came, and that's how the science of Kalam was born.
Okay. Now, is it important for a Muslim to know, at what degree is it important for a Muslim to know the nature of the Mu'tazilite doubts and issues? So let's say a person, we know that a student of knowledge should know those matters, right?
Yeah.
But is it important for non-students of knowledge to know what were the issues that the scholars had with the Mu'tazilites? And if so, what is the basic summary of the error of the Mu'tazilites? What is their basic error?
So I don't think it's this is actually one of the reasons why I developed Kalam 3.0, because what I found was that when we read the old books of Kalam, then what we're actually learning is doubt that existed in the past. And we're learning those doubts and problems that existed in the past, and we're learning the responses to those doubts and problems that existed in the past. Some of those doubts and problems are relevant today, but some of them are not relevant. And so what happens in a Kalam education, and it's not specific to Kalam, so in the science of fiqh, right? So if you study fiqh, they talk about wells and chickens and what happens if a chicken falls into a well, and so it was very practical, and it's very practical in that time. But when I don't need to study it today if I'm not a student of knowledge. And so in the same way, in the science of Kalam, there's many issues that are responses, that are responses to problems at that time. And if we, for somebody who's not a student of knowledge, it's not beneficial to introduce them to problems that they don't have, right?
Yeah.
So those things, they need to be taken out. And what we need to do is we need to understand the problems that they do have and speak to those problems and solve those problems. And that's part of
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Now let's do a quick look at what is Kalam 2.0, and then we can take the dive into Kalam 3.0, because that's what matters to those are the subjects that everyday people are facing today.
Yes. So Kalam 2.0 is a conversation with a group of people called the Falasifa. So Falasifa are normally often translated as philosophers, but it's not a good translation, because now when we talk about philosophy, you have the philosophy of science, you have the philosophy of economics, you have philosophy of history, you have philosophy of everything, right? So philosophy now just means to think deeply about something. But when we talk about the Falasifa here, it's a particular kind of philosophy. We call it Neo-Platonic philosophy. So I'll explain what that means. So what happened was that you had the most influential philosopher of all time is Aristotle or Plato. They compete with each other. So Aristotle was really influential, and in Western history amongst Christians, there's a history of trying to reconcile Aristotle with Plato. Well, Aristotle says this, Plato says this, who's right, who's wrong, how do you work it out? And so that was their intellectual endeavor. Like, these are like the two philosophers that they know. It's all out of date now, but this is what they were doing. So in this conversation, they developed a modification on Aristotle that introduced certain ideas of Plato into that philosophy. And that philosophy, it came to be known as Neo-Platonism. Neo-Platonism, it became part of Christianity, and it came through the Christians into the Muslim world. And there were some major Muslim philosophers, most prominent amongst them Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina. These two philosophers, Al-Farabi, he was mostly a translator, but Ibn Sina was original. He has some original contributions, some good contributions, but he also has a number of serious mistakes. So these scholars, they introduced into Arabic the ideas of the Neoplatonists, and this was a complete philosophical system. It was far more.
The Neoplatonists, just to review, is a type of merging between Aristotle's ideas and Plato's ideas.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this infused, and it was a full structure that entered into the Christian religion. Theology, I should say. Yeah.
Yes. And it came from there into the Muslim world. Because
and what do you mean by entered in there, and like what were the ideas?
The ideas are, so this is what falsafa is. Falsafa has a definition, and definition of falsafa is a very broad definition. You use your mind to learn about everything that exists as much as human beings are able to. And so when it says use your mind, it means you don't use revelation. No place for revelation. So put revelation aside, just use your mind. What can you discover about the world? So in this system, they began with logic. And so they said, this is how logic works. You have syllogisms, you have conclusions, and they had very sophisticated analysis of logic. Then they had metaphysics. And in metaphysics, they established the existence of something called a necessary being, wajibul wujud. So the falasifa, the Neoplatonists, they believed in quote unquote God. So it's not quite the idea of God that we believe in, but they weren't materialists like the atheists of today. This is really important to understand. They weren't materialists. They believed that the universe depended on something that is independent, and they constructed arguments for it. So they believed this. This was their metaphysics. And then upon this metaphysics, they built their science, which is called natural science. So they built their medicine and how the world changes, the four elements of Aristotle. They explained it. They explained it. There's a lot of Aristotelian thought in there, but they grounded all of it in this necessary being, and they said that the necessary being is like a cause. It doesn't have a choice. It just results in the universe, and it results in the universe, and things in the universe, they have natures, essential natures, and these natures, they determine necessarily what that thing will do. So and from this, they constructed a logical system that described everything in the universe. And so this is Neo-Platonic falsafa. And so if you wanted to study science or math is part of this too. And they also had a system of ethics and politics. So if you wanted to study all of these things and benefit from them, there's a lot of beneficial things in there. You were exposed to all of these ideas. So then this is where Imam al-Ghazali, who is called Hujjatul Islam, he wrote his famous book, Tahafutul Falasifa, The Incoherence of the Falasifa, which is translated into English. It's a fairly good translation by Marmura. And so he what he did was, it was really phenomenal. He understood falsafa, and then he used logic, and he critiqued the conclusions of the falasifa using their own terms. And he said that there are certain branches of falsafa that are not problematic at all. Math, there's no problem with it. And he said that it's really important for us to say about the parts of falsafa that are not problematic. It's really important for us to say that they're not problematic. Because if we just say that the falasifa, they hold these beliefs that are un-Islamic and they're all bad, then we'll lose the trust of everybody. And so the introduction of Imam al-Ghazali to Tahafutul Falasifa, really important to read. It shows somebody who is very balanced, very fair, uses his mind, and then it's a philosophical study, and he corrects the mistakes. And he mentions like 17 mistakes, and he says that 3 of them, they take the person outside, you're no longer a Muslim. And those 3 major things were belief in the eternality of the world. So the falasifa, they believed that the universe did not begin to exist because they said God is eternal and the universe follows necessarily from him. And so therefore it's also eternal. It never began to exist. So that was the first. And he said that this goes against what is definitely known from our religion. Like we believed the universe was created after not having existed. And the second point that he said takes one out of Islam is the denial of the bodily resurrection. So they said that because they believed in necessary natural causation, they said that anything that goes against the laws of science, if you want to call them, according to what they believed in, is impossible. So there's no such thing as a bodily resurrection.
So they believed the laws of science were absolute.
They did. Okay. More so than modern scientists. Okay. Because for them, this is what they were doing was if you can logically wrap your mind around God and turn him into a cause and relate that to the things in the universe, you can logically, rationally, through a series of syllogisms and essential natures of things, describe all of reality.
I see.
And that's what they were trying to do. That's what. It's not normally well understood, but that's what they were trying to do. So that was the second one. The third one was they said that God does not know the universals. He only knows certain specific particulars. So they denied the knowledge of God. So Imam Ghazali said that on these 3 points they went. It would take them out of Islam. So he wrote his book Tahafut. He corrected these things rationally. He showed rationally why they're mistaken. And then from the work of Imam al-Ghazali, Kalam 2.0 was born. From Imam al-Razi developed it, and others followed, and it reached its peak in the work of Taftazani and E.G. These are probably the most important Kalam 2.0 scholars, and their works have many, many commentaries and super commentaries, all derived from them. And what they did was they took all of falsafa. They swallowed falsafa. So Imam Taftazani, he has a famous statement in his Sharh al-Aqaid that if it weren't for the inclusion of the sam'iyat, of inclusion in the books of Kalam, things to do with the afterlife, the books of Kalam are indistinguishable from falsafa, because they basically took all of it, swallowed it, understood it, and critiqued it from within. Mm-hmm. And so Kalam 2.0, that's what it is. It's a very impressive intellectual achievement. It's very impressive.
Okay. Yeah. Now, what happened in the world of kufr? When I say the world of kufr, I'm not saying that the world of people trying to tear down the ummah and trying to tear down Islam. I'm just saying in the non-Islamic world of philosophers, the non-Muslim world of philosophers, things changed. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
What happened to Neoplatonism that caused the non-believing philosophers to transform such that we would need a Kalam 3.0?
Yeah. So what happened? So it's a complete difference. So what happened was that Aristotle is now irrelevant. The modern world is based on a refutation of Aristotle. And
really?
So modern science is based on a refutation. So the initial church science conflict between Galileo and the church, what was the problem? Well, Galileo, Copernicus, they're saying that it's the sun that's at the center and the earth goes around it. But Aristotle, he said that no, the earth is at the center and everything else goes around it. And that was consumed by the church and stated as official church doctrine. And so modern science was born out of a refutation of this. Modern science was born out of a refutation of many other Aristotelian positions, such as, for example, Aristotle believed that heavier objects fall faster than lighter objects. And this was also disproven. The birth of modern science involves disproving Leaning Tower of Pisa. They tried to drop heavy things and light things. There's also this idea of essential natures. And this is critical to modern science, because what Aristotle used to do was that he used to look at things. He used to say that the nature of a seed is that it should grow into a tree. And the nature of an acorn is that it should grow into an oak tree. And this nature you arrive at through philosophical reflection. So this is in its nature. And from this philosophical reflection on the essential nature, you can figure out what's going to happen in the future. So he just said it makes sense for heavier objects to fall faster than lighter ones. And so he used his mind a lot and to come to these conclusions. And modern science said that don't do that. Forget about essential natures. Don't try to discover what's going to happen by philosophically reflecting on essential natures. Just do experiments.
This is the shift from assessing the world by aql to tajriba.
Yeah.
And as I always say, the first thing a person should know about epistemology is that the sources of knowledge are either transmission, reason, or observation. Mm-hmm. And he sort of overextended reason, whereas into the realm of observation.
Yes,
is really what he did.
Yeah.
Whereas you don't need to think about certain things. That can be observed by a demonstration.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is why when we find in the books in the Mutakallimun, when we talk about in Kalam 2.0, we're refuting essential natures because that goes against our theology. Well, people don't believe in essential natures anymore. Mm-hmm. We are refuting the fact that the world is eternal. Nobody believes the world is eternal anymore. Even the atheists believe the universe began to exist, the Big Bang Theory. We are, what else are we doing? We are, there's this discussion about, does the world really exist? That comes at the beginning of books of Kalam, the sophists. That's not the problem anymore. The problem now is that we believe that the world is the only thing that exists, right? So materialism is like, it says this is a physical world that exists. Don't be stupid. Of course it's there, but nothing else exists. I'm only going to believe what I'm going to see. There's another thing. It'll come to me. But like these are some examples of how the scene has completely changed. So the scene has completely changed, and that's why Kalam 2.0, even though it's an amazing intellectual achievement, it doesn't speak to the needs of the time. So that's why I say that when I say that, so I have a statement which I believe is true, that Kalam is dead. Because if Kalam is dead, why is it dead? Because when I say Kalam is dead, it's not a new statement. Imam Ghazalis, he said all of the sciences are dead. That's why he wrote Ihya Ulum ad-Din. So if you read Mufti Taqi Uthmani in his book on Mu'amalat, al-Fiqh al-Buyu' ala al-Madhahib al-Arba'a, he says that the books of fiqh used to be alive because they were dealing with real issues, but now they don't, and so he wrote this new book. So in the same way, Kalam is dead because the books that we are studying, which are really important, they're very impressive achievements, but if our goal is to train students to master the problems and questions of a long gone age that are not in the minds of people now, and master the art of refuting them, and if that's all that Kalam is, then there's something wrong. And that's why we need Kalam 3.0.
So by dead you mean irrelevant, not answering the questions of the day.
Yes.
It's amazing that how you mentioned fiqh of buyu'a, because the moment you said that it's dead, meaning it's not answering the questions of the day, so much of Islamic economics feels to me like a Band-Aid on cancer, right? Where there's not a actual genuine a solution to it. It's almost like you're Band-Aiding, or you're just giving some life support on someone who's dying. And it's interesting. I was thinking about that, and you mentioned it right away. So this is a good moment to now say, well, what are the issues of today before we get to answering them, right? What are the main issues? Could you say that they are 3, 4, 5 issues, or 2 issues that really come to the fore of what kufr is today, and what is it that a theologian, a teacher, an imam, even a parent, even a college student really needs to know?
Actually, it's one issue. And that issue is scientific naturalism, scientific materialism. This is the issue. And
scientism.
All of the scientism.
So excess so now Aristotle used reason where he should have used observation, and of course he rejected transmission. Now we swung to the opposite end, where it's all observation and demonstrable. Demonstration is the only source of truth. Reason is sort of pushed to the side, let alone transmission. That seems like what the Western civilization did.
And that's based on a more fundamental problem. So it's based on a more fundamental problem, which is a philosophical problem, which is naturalism or materialism or physicalism. So materialism is the belief that the physical universe, the observable universe, is the only thing that exists. So the things that science can measure are the only things that exist. And if they're the only things that exist, then these are the things that are making other things happen. So it's chemical reactions that produce the chemical products. It's medicine that produces the cure. It's nuclear fusion that powers the sun. And this is something that all our children are learning. Anyone who studies science is learning this, because science in our high schools, in our universities, it is taught on top of this idea of materialism. So it's this materialism that needs to be dealt with, and it has all of the problems are basically a fara. They're the fara of materialism.
A branch.
Yeah.
Okay. And what is...
So
let's begin the response.
What are some issues? So why do people... So right now, so let's look at atheism. So what is the source of atheism today? The source of atheism is naturalism. It's the belief that the physical universe is everything that exists. What is the source? What is the problem with evolution? The problem with the theory of evolution is that when it's understood within a materialist framework, then what it's saying is there's no space for God, and we human beings therefore have to come about as a result of this natural cause and effect system that we've discovered through reason. And therefore we have ancestors, we have non-human ancestors, because miracles are impossible. It's because of materialism that miracles are impossible. It's because of materialism that prophecy is also impossible, because there's a miraculous element to it. Miracles confirm prophecy, and prophecy, it tells you something from a necessary being. So all of our problems. So you think of the multiverse. So where does the multiverse objection comes from? Actually, that's another thing. So which is that what's happening is that the problem is materialism. You have these branches from it, and then we have Christian responses to materialism. So Christian responses to materialism, they come from a different worldview than our worldview. So I have a course. It's called Why Islam is True. And it's a level 1 to Kalam 3.0. It's basically the Kalam, it's the arguments that the average non-talib al-ilm needs. And alhamdulillah, by the grace of God, there's a couple of hundred teachers that have been trained to teach it. They're teaching it on the ground in classrooms and masajid. Thousands of students have learned from it. There's a textbook as well. And if anyone's interested, you can go to whyislamistrue.com to find out more. But in part of this course, there's what we do is we divide people's perspectives today into 3 worldviews. You have the atheist worldview, which is based on naturalism. You have the Christian worldview, which is based on something called supernaturalism, and it's the same as polytheism. And you have the Muslim worldview, which is based on contingency, and contingency is really important. And I think that's I'll maybe unpack that a little bit. But the Christian worldview, from the Christian worldview, there are responses to materialism. And what Muslims are doing, because they haven't studied Kalam, is that they are taking the Christian responses wholesale and using them, because they don't see an authentic Muslim response. And that puts them into problematic situations regarding their own aqida, because they don't understand the implications of the Christian argument. And actually, also, if you look at it fairly, in the Christian atheist debate, there are a number of issues where the atheists, they win. And I think that, to be fair, you have to say that, but that's because the Christian is not using the correct argument. It's not because the atheist has the upper hand over the Muslim. So I'm not sure how I got here. I think we went a number of places.
We were saying that naturalism, scientism, the concept that the universe is the only thing that exists. Hence, that actually gives birth to Darwinism or evolution, in that the human being must have only come through the laws of nature, which are absolute. Because I had asked, what is the core of the modern philosophy of kufr, and you said it's this naturalism and scientism. So
And then
How?
just one more thing, like
Yeah.
that reminds me why I talked about the Christians, which is that when you have the Christian responses, then Muslims embrace the Christian worldview, and then that gives a rise to problems like the problem of evil, which is a uniquely Christian problem. It's never been a problem in our history. So what's happened is that we are stuck between naturalism and a Christian response to naturalism. And so that's now they're like the Mu'tazila, you know. Like,
What are the problems with the Christian premise?
So the Christian the problem is, so let's first understand the Muslim premise. So the key thing in the Muslim worldview, and this is part of the move to Kalam 3.0. So in Kalam 2.0, the main argument for the existence of God that's front and center is the argument for the existence of God from the fact that the universe began to exist. It's Dalil al-Huduth. It's entered Western philosophy, known as the Kalam cosmological argument. And the reason why that was the central argument is because the Muslims at that time, they were speaking to people who believed that the universe depended on an independent being, but they didn't believe that the universe began to exist. So they used this argument at that time. But today, when we speak to materialists, they don't believe in an independent being. They deny anything beyond the physical universe. So they are worse than the falasifa. They are one step removed from the falasifa. So the main argument that needs to be front and center, which is also part of our tradition, is the argument from contingency, which is an argument for the existence of God from the fact that the universe is needy and dependent, and there needs to be a being that's independent on which it exists.
That's the summary of the contingency argument.
That's the summary of the contingency argument. Yeah. Right. And so I have, if somebody's interested, I have a free series called Quranic Case for God, and you can see the contingency argument in action and how it corrects a Christian atheist debate. QuranicCaseForGod.com. So the contingency argument, what it does is it refutes materialism, and it shows that the universe, the physical universe, depends on something that doesn't need anything, is transcendent, and it's a complete and utter dependence. So that that independent being is the one who makes the sun shine. He is the one who makes the wind blow. He is the one who keeps the birds in the sky, just as the Quran describes it. And this is the Muslim worldview. It's a worldview based on the complete dependence of the universe on a being that doesn't need anything. The Christian worldview is not like that. And the reason why it's not like that is that Christians, they believe in the divinity of a human being. So what that means is that their belief in God is not a belief in a transcendent, independent deity that does not resemble anything on which everything depends. In fact, they believe God died. So their idea of God is not the same as our idea of God, and their idea of the universe and its relationship to God is also not the same as our idea. So they believe in something called supernaturalism, which means that they believe, when they say that they believe in God, they are affirming the existence of a being that is more powerful than nature. More powerful than nature. So nature has a power.
By it.
Yeah, nature has a power. God is more powerful. Nature runs things. God puts the laws of nature apart and intervenes. And that's not our worldview. Our worldview, everything is completely dependent on God. So this is the Christian worldview. And from this perspective, when they are arguing against the atheist, they're not trying to prove the existence of an independent being, but they're trying to prove the existence of a supernatural being. And so their arguments are going to be of this nature. So their arguments are going to try, and the way that their arguments work is they say that, is there something that science cannot explain? Can I find a hole in science? And that's why the theory of evolution is so important in Christian atheist debates today, because the Christians, what they're saying is that the design the complex design in living things cannot be explained by science, therefore God did it. And the atheists are saying it can be explained by science, therefore we don't need God. Mustafa Sabri, he said, the last Shaykh al-Islam of the Ottoman Empire, he said in his work, he said that if the theory of evolution were to be true, then it would not disprove the existence of God. It would strengthen the argument for the existence of God. And because the main argument that he put front and center was the argument from contingency. And a lot of my work is inspired by the work of Mustafa Sabri. And so it's this debate that's between the Christian and the atheist. It can't happen in that way between the Muslim and the atheist. It's gonna take a different form. So, and we need to give it a different form. And that's what that's what the Kalam 3.0 is about. Also, I do this in my Why Islam is True course for non-scholars, for the average person, because everybody needs to know this, because evolution is everywhere.
Speak to us more about the contingency argument, and I'm going to ask two questions. Number one, is it put in a traditional syllogism? How can you summarize it in a nutshell? And second question is, what are the furu'a, or the subset issues that it applies to?
Can I share my screen?
Share your screen, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Let me.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can. I have permission to do that. 1 second. Let me show you something.
Should I take you off and just have him?
Yeah, when he shares the screen. Yeah.
Okay. So, can you see it? Yeah. Okay, so this is the upcoming book. I hope to. So Naz took this course, and with his help and with the help of many other students, I'm refining it, and then inshallah I'll release it soon. But what I do here is I take the key arguments, and I show here, and the first one is the Quranic contingency argument. And there's a number of others, a design argument, oneness argument, and I express them in a syllogism. So if we go to, here's the Quranic contingency argument, and here's a syllogism. So a syllogism, it works like this. It says A is B. The universe is contingent. All B is C. Every contingent thing depends on a necessary being to make it the way that it is. Therefore, A is C. Therefore, the universe depends on a necessary being to make it the way that it is. So then you take each syllogism, each statement in the syllogism, which we call a premise, and here on the right-hand side, you can label it as being inferential or non-inferential. Inferential means that it's something that needs another argument. Non-inferential means it's known without argument, daruri. So this here, then you can unpack it, and I have another syllogism that unpacks it, and the conclusion of this other syllogism is this syllogism. And this is what you asked, like this is what the syllogism would look like. So the way that this works is it uses terms. It uses technical terms. So what I prefer to do is let me not, I'll come back to this in a second. Let's not use technical terms for a moment. Let's try and understand this first at an intuitive level, because first we grasp at an intuitive level, and then we learn the technical terms and structure so that we can defend it. At an intuitive level, the idea behind the contingency argument is that everything in the universe is dependent. Contingency means dependency. So what does it mean it's dependent? It means that it needs something else to make it how it is. And we see this intuitively. So I look at the sun, I say, why is it shining? The fact that I say, sun, why are you shining? means that I can see that it needs something to make it shine. I look at the wind and it's blowing. I say, wind, why are you blowing? The fact that I ask this question means that I see it needs something to make it blow. So the entire scientific enterprise, it assumes that everything in the universe needs an explanation. And if things in the... Yeah?
Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to clarify before cutting you off there. We don't need to really prove that. Number one, it's self-explanatory, self-observable, but also the worldview that we're talking to, the scientific worldview that we're talking to, scientism, also admits that.
Yes.
Okay. Good.
That's exactly. And that's actually, so somebody says that what if somebody denies this? And then so the most effective way to kind of combat it is to say that, well, you can't really do science without it. And since everybody, believes in science,
this is musallam. Both sides agree to the concept. Universe is in need of things. Everything in the world that we see is in need of something else.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the first step. Now, the second step is we want to show that the thing that it's in need of cannot be in need of anything else. And that's what we call a necessary being. So, and this is where we differ with the materialist, with the scientific materialist. We differ with them because they say that that other dependent things in the universe can make things in the universe the way that they are. So they say that it's medicine makes the cure. Fire causes the burning. That's what they say. We say no, we dispute that. We say that no, we agree that they're both dependent, but the dependency of things can only be explained by something that's independent. So now this argument is made in many different forms, and I chose the one that was actually I take it from Mustafa Sabri in his Mawqif. He uses this demonstration. He thinks it's the clearest one. He says that imagine a long line of leaning people. He says that if you have one person and that person is leaning on someone else. Now, what you have a situation where this person who's leaning is dependent and he's being held up by someone else. Now let's lean this other person back too. We're going to lean this other person back. There's somebody else holding them up. And now the important thing to observe here is that the thing in the middle now isn't doing anything. Because if the person at the end goes, they all fall down. And this illustrates a principle. And the principle is that if A depends on B and B depends on C, then B isn't doing anything.
Yeah.
A really just depends on C.
Correct.
So that means that if you explain something in the universe with something else in the universe that's also dependent, then that thing in the universe doesn't really explain it. It's the thing that it depends on that is explaining it. And if everything in the universe is dependent, then nothing then you don't have anything to explain what's happening. And so what you need something that doesn't need anything. And it's that thing that's making everything the way that it is. Yep.
Okay. So in this example of dependency, if they're all connected in a circle, okay, so we can we submit to the line of leaning people. The line of leaning people has to have a wall or a person leaning them, supporting them. What if, though, they're in a circle?
Yeah.
So circularity.
Yeah. So circularity is, so in the physical example of circularity, the people who are leaning are not really completely dependent on the thing behind them because they're actually supporting the person ahead of them. So if you actually work out the laws of physics and the way that they work, each person in the line is doing something to the person in front of him and then being held by the person behind him. So it's not a situation where things are really completely dependent on something else. So this analogy of the long line of leaning people, it is an analogy. It's not something, we're not saying actually that the contingent things in the universe are all depending on each, are lined up, and God is at the end. What we're really saying is that God is holding everything else up immediately. This is a proof by contradiction. It's saying that if contingent things were the only thing, then there would be nothing to hold them up. Mm-hmm. So the situation that best describes the situation that scientists, materialists are dealing with is the long line of leading people. But you can use other analogies too. So one of my students, he said that, you know, the way that what helps him is to, instead of having a line of people, to have somebody standing on the shoulders of somebody else, and that person standing on the shoulders of somebody else. And then you keep on doing that. And he said there's no ground. What happens? They're all falling. Now you can't get in a circle. So you can't, it doesn't help you. So and you have other analogies too, but there's this general idea. It's an intuition that if A depends on B, B depends on C, B isn't doing anything, A depends on C. If you get that, then you can get the conclusion.
What have some atheists said in response to this?
So atheists have yet to respond to this, but there are some responses. I'll come to them. But this form of the argument is not made in the mainstream. There is a contingency argument that Thomas Aquinas made, Leibniz made, but they're not the same, because nobody comes to the radical conclusion that the Muslims do, which is that the universe completely depends on God, completely and utterly. But the objections that they normally make are they can only make one of two objections, because if you put everything into a syllogism, and this is why syllogisms are important. If you put into a syllogism, what is a syllogism? It says that if you accept the first premise, QC1, and you accept the second premise, QC2, you have to accept the conclusion. Mm-hmm. But if you agree A is B, if you agree B is C, you have to agree that A is C. And if you don't agree that A is C, you're only allowed to do that if you disagree with one of the two premises. So what you do in this way is you confine the debate, and the debate now happens on your terms. Mm-hmm. You're not so now I've confined debate. So now, in order for an atheist to disagree, he has to disagree with the first premise, or he has to disagree with the second premise. So the first premise, the universe is contingent. The only thing he can say, the universe is not contingent, and we already talked about how to kind of respond to that, to say that, well, science presumes contingency. There's other ways too. But the second thing here, there is the most common objection is the most common objection to the second thing is something called the fallacy of composition. Okay. So the fallacy of composition, what I've done here is I've actually cataloged all of the possible objections and their answers. So you can object here, or you can object with the fallacy of composition. So the fallacy of composition, it says that okay, this thing in the universe is contingent, and this thing in the universe is contingent. The individual things in the universe are contingent, but the universe as a whole is not contingent. Because for you to go from the contingency of the part to the contingency of the whole commits a logical fallacy. You cannot assume that just because the parts are contingent, that the whole is contingent. And they give an example, and they'll say that the bricks in a wall are all small. Does that mean that the entire wall is small? No, it doesn't. To say that because the bricks are small, the wall that is composed of those bricks commits the fallacy of composition. So this is an objection that they will raise. And so the answer to that objection is to say is you can answer it in a number of different ways. The first way is to say that actually you don't need to say the entire universe is contingent. Just as long as one thing is contingent, it needs a necessary being. So you just kind of sidestep the whole thing. Another way is to say, this is the most comprehensive way, it's to say that this gets a little bit technical, but it's hopefully it's okay. But it's to say that the fallacy of composition is an informal fallacy. An informal fallacy means it's a fallacy that's not related to the abstract form of the argument. A is B, B is C, A is C, that's the form. An informal fallacy has to do with the subject matter. So there are cases where inferring extrapolating the property of the part to the whole is fallacious, such as when you extrapolate the smallness of the brick to the smallness of the wall, that's fallacious. But there's other cases where it's not fallacious. The bricks in the wall are red, therefore the whole wall is red. Correct. The bricks in the wall are heavy, therefore the whole wall is heavy. Correct. The bricks in the wall are hard, therefore the whole wall is hard. Correct. So the question is that if we say the things in the universe are contingent, therefore the whole universe is contingent, is it like saying the bricks in the wall are small, therefore the whole wall is small? Fallacy? Or is it like saying the bricks in the wall are hard, therefore the whole wall is hard? Correct. And we say it's like the latter.
And I would
clearly like the latter.
Correct.
Yeah.
And one would also be able to say that every whole is contingent, because by saying whole, you are inferring the existence of parts. Therefore, it is dependent upon parts.
Yep, you could say that.
So a whole can never be separated from its parts and can never have a different essence than its parts.
Yes.
And by nature, a whole must be dependent, right? Mm-hmm. The entire object must be dependent because just by definition, it is consistent of smaller objects, therefore dependent upon them.
Yep.
Yeah. Let me ask a question now on the laws of nature. How do you prove that something like gravity, which is a law, it's a description of behavior, right? It's not even a thing itself, but we find that physicists always go back to the laws of nature. How do you prove that the laws of nature, or what would you say when somebody says, prove to me that the laws of nature are contingent?
Okay, so a law of nature, first you have to define what a law of nature is. And so our scholars, they said, al-hukmu ala shay'in far'un an tasawwurihi. Before you can say something about something, you have to understand what it is. So what is a law of nature? So a law of nature is a mathematical description of regularities in the universe, of the way that things regularly happen in the universe. So if you take the law of gravity, for example, the law of gravity is a mathematical equation. And that's really where the confusion is coming from, because people say that math is necessary and the relations are necessary, therefore, but the mathematical equation itself, it has necessary relations, but its application to the world is not necessary. It does not have to describe the world. But what we do is we observe regular relationships between things, and we see that the pattern of these things that happen in the universe, it can be consistently described by a mathematical equation. And we call that a law of nature. Go ahead.
So therefore, it would be fair to say that the laws are not the source of anything. A law of nature is merely a description of the behavior of two objects.
Yeah.
Hence, it's what we call a'arid, not a that. And it's not it's a'arid. Can you explain to everyone what is it, the difference between a'arid and, let's say, a jism or an essence of things?
So the law of nature is you said it really well. You said the law of nature describes the behavior of things, and those things are contingent. So problem solved. So those contingent things depend on the necessary being. We've just proven that. And the law of nature is just describing a pattern of relationships, pattern of divine action.
Yeah, essentially we're saying that this chess piece that the philosopher or the physicist just moved is an invalid chess piece. We're not invalid, but it's not even a standalone piece, right? It's not even a piece to begin with, all right? It is merely a description of a piece, right? So it's merely the real discussion can solely lie upon things that we know that exist unto themselves.
Yeah, laws of nature don't exist.
Yeah. So the laws of nature is merely a description of things that moved. Now, can we go into the other objections
to this argument?
Yeah, because I'm benefiting a lot just by the objection and the reaction, the ping-ponging back and forth.
Yeah, so I think there's only to this argument, there's the objection to the first premise, there's objection to the second premise, which is the fallacy of composition, and then there's an objection to the conclusion. And this you'll find if you Google the argument from contingency, you'll find it everywhere. And this objection will say that fine, a necessary being exists, but that doesn't mean it's God. So this objection has a history. The history of the objection is that the argument from contingency that's known to Western philosophers is the one that was formulated by Thomas Aquinas. He has his famous 5 ways, and one of them is a contingency argument that's not the same as ours, but he makes it, and at the end, after proving the existence of a necessary being, he has his famous last words. He says, and that is what everybody calls God.
Yeah.
So what they do is they latch on to that form of the contingency argument, and they say, wait a minute, necessary being, you're saying it's God, and that God is Jesus, and that Jesus died, and all of your other things, and it doesn't make sense. You're not allowed to make that jump, right? So that's where it's coming from. So they'll say that the necessary being, but you can't say it's God. And here's where it's important for us to detach ourselves from the Christian worldview. We just separate yourself from that whole thing. If you separate yourself from that whole thing, then the answer to this question is you're right.
Yep. Yeah.
Because the only thing you've proven is the existence of a necessary being.
Yeah.
There are additional arguments that you need to show that necessary being has attributes of life, knowledge, will, power, that necessary being is one, and that necessary being, its name is Allah. You do that by proving Muhammadur Rasulullah. So we haven't got there yet. Just, wait a little bit. I'll take you there.
Yeah.
But you're right.
You arrived at, basically you traded one problem for a lesser problem, right? The problem of kufr, you basically traded that to, okay, we submit to that there is a necessary being. Essentially, we have another problem now, the solution to which is nubuwwah, prophethood.
Yeah.
Right. And now it's much easier to talk to somebody about prophethood and the Quran than it is anything else. And one of the simple reasons for that is that there's not a lot of candidates in the field, right? There are not many people who claimed to have spoken to that necessary being or make any absolute claims about the necessary being. And so we now enter the realm of proving the Quran and nubuwwah. And hence, reason has arrived us at the need for transmitted knowledge. Right? Otherwise, we remain at this dead end. Right? Without transmitted knowledge, we would all remain at a point where we recognize only a few attributes of God, or what we philosophical God, or God, the attributes of God determined by reason, that he exists, and maybe we can even prove that has knowledge, that lives, that is alive, etc. But we can't prove anything else merely by reason, and that's where we go into now the deep dive into the Quran and the Hadith as a proof, and also into anecdotal evidence and many other things that would show that the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is true and correct. So that basically sounds like that's the summary of your course, correct? That you've summarized the almost daruri knowledge of the contingency argument. Would you say that's accurate, or is there something else that we didn't look at?
There's 4. So in the level 1, why Islam is true, there's 4 arguments. There's 4 rational arguments. There's the argument from contingency, which proves the existence of a necessary being. It's a formal argument. There's a second argument, which is the argument from design. And it differs from the Christian argument from design, because our argument from design, which was made by the mutakallimun, because where did the mutakallimun make it? They made it against the falasifa, because the falasifa negated the fact that God had knowledge, will, power, life. And so they negated the fact that Allah is a fa'il mukhtar. So the second set of arguments taken from our Kalam tradition, which goes back to the Quran, all of these arguments are in the Quran, it proves, there's a formal argument that shows that this necessary being is an agent, has will, knowledge, power, and life. Then there's a third argument, which shows that that being is one. And so you have one, and so which is called, we have a dalil called dalil al-tamanu. And what this leaves us with is that now you view the universe, you view everything that's happening as the freely chosen action of one being on whom everything depends. And now there's the argument for the genuine messengerhood of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's many ways to do it, as you said, but traditionally the way that the mutakallimun used, and it's also inspired by the Quran, is dalil al-mu'jiza, which is miracles. And so you have to prove that miracles happen. You use historical methods to prove that the Prophet existed. And then and the Quran is a living miracle. And a miracle is, what it does is that it is that one being interrupting the regular associations and in sign language telling you that he's confirming the prophetic claim. So the analogy that the mutakallimun give is, they say that imagine that somebody is in a room and the king is there, and somebody stands up and says, I'm a messenger from this king to tell you that your taxes are doubled. And then the people say, well, what's your proof? The king didn't say that. And I say, if I'm the messenger, then don't kill the messenger. So if I'm the messenger, then people will say that, I'll say that, well, look at the king, he's going to do something that he doesn't normally do. He's going to stand up and sit down 3 times. And so people turn to look at the king, and lo and behold, at that moment, he stands up and sits down 3 times. Since he did something that he doesn't normally do, when I claimed to speak on his behalf, that thing is understood as confirmation of my claim.
Correct.
So in the same way, when a messenger claims to be a messenger from this being who I know everything depends on him, and then when he claims that being does something they don't normally do, which we call a miracle, at that point, in this context, that miracle is understood as confirmation from that necessary being that this is a genuine messenger. And this argument can also be formalized. So if you take these 4 arguments, argument from contingency, the Quranic design argument, the Quranic argument for divine oneness, and the argument for the genuine messengerhood, you come to the end conclusion through a series of syllogisms that La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, and now Islam has been shown to be like a fact for you. And so this is like basic.
Okay, my final question. Who are some of the major, popularly well-known philosophers who are out there that you believe should be responded to publicly because they have a following that's leading people, down this a path of disbelief?
So I think that I think that we have to proceed in steps.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first step is that what we do is we look at the average Muslim and we help them see that Islam is true. That's the first step. Then the second step we do is you look at the problem of naturalism and materialism. And in naturalism and materialism, this pervades everything. And this is the most important thing because it's not one philosopher, but it's in our science curricula everywhere and everybody's studying it. And then on top of that, after you do that, then you can look at the more complex arguments of the philosophers. You can look at the classical philosophers. Kant is important. All of modern philosophy comes from him. Hume is important. Descartes is important. But then I think more modern philosophers, it's important to look at the works of Christian philosophers. Alvin Plantinga is an important philosopher who's done a lot of good work, but there's many issues, and I think that dealing with his philosophy is something that will reinvigorate our Kalam tradition. And there are others as well, but this needs to happen at level 3. So I'm currently on level 2. So inshallah, level 3 will come after. And then after that, that's when the old works of Kalam
MashaAllah.
be understood and applied.
William Lane Craig is somebody that many Muslims go to.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning it. Yeah,
for that, for these responses. What are I think you've already mentioned it, but what are the main flaws of his philosophy? Like where does he fail against atheists?
Okay, this is really good. So, and I actually have a section in Kalam 3.0 just on that. I have a section, I call it the real Kalam cosmological argument, which is, so let me just tell, William Lane Craig, who is he, what did he do? So what happened is that in modern science, there's the discovery of the Big Bang. And the discovery of the Big Bang is really significant because people, for the first time, they have scientific evidence that the universe began to exist. And so if the universe began to exist, then that has natural implications for the existence of God. And so William Lane Craig, as scientists are talking about this, he said that, wait a minute, there's actually a group of people called the Mutakallimun, who are Muslim Kalam scholars, and they developed philosophical arguments for the fact that the universe began to exist. And this was only done by the Muslims. Thomas Aquinas, the most important Christian theologian and philosopher, he didn't believe that you could make a rational argument to show that the universe began to exist. Moses Maimonides, the Jewish theologian, also didn't believe. So the people who carried this argument through history were the Mutakallimun. And that's why William Lane Craig says that he christened the argument the Kalam cosmological argument. So he named it the Kalam cosmological argument for the existence of God. So he gave it this name and it entered Western philosophy. And since that time, it's been the most widely debated and studied and published argument for the existence of God in Western philosophy. And he's come to become an authority on it. He defends it against all of the objections. His best defense, the best place to look for people who are interested, is in the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology. It has like 150 pages on the Kalam cosmological argument by William Lane Craig and somebody else. And he details the argument and responds to all of the shubuhat. So William Lane Craig, he is a Christian, and which means that he is committed to the idea that God is contingent and he came into the universe. So when he makes this Kalam cosmological argument, he makes it in a way that supports his belief. The way that the Muslims made it, this conclusion is unthinkable. But William Lane Craig, he makes this argument and he says, he has a famous formulation of it. He says that the universe began to exist. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Therefore, the universe has a cause for its existence. And he says that cause is supernatural, but he doesn't say that cause is a necessary being. He doesn't go there. And the Mutakallimun, what they do is, when they make this argument, they return it at the end to the contingency argument. But because William Lane Craig doesn't do that, it allows him to say, as he does, if in his 150 page paper, he makes an argument. He says that this God, after creating the universe, enters into time. He enters into time. He becomes part of the universe. And that's part of his argument. And it's because he doesn't take this step. So I think this is something really important that Muslims should be aware of. And he frames the argument in a way that fits with his worldview. This is the most important flaw. I think there's other more minor ones, but they're a little bit more technical.
He actually ends up having to negate his logical methodology.
Yeah, he
right,
does.
and that's a problem with Christianity, and it's also the problem with tajsim in Islam. Anyone who is a mujassim, who insists that upon the concepts that God entered into his creation and is with his essence in the heavens. There's no difference between God being with his essence in the heavens and with his essence in a man. So tajsim, just as we said that the philosophers Aristotle, Plato, Neo-Platonism was an excess in reason. It used the intellect where it doesn't work or doesn't belong. Contemporary scientism is an excess, an indulgence in observable data, observable knowledge. Like this is limiting all of knowledge to what can be observed. Philosophers limiting all of knowledge to what could be reasoned. Well, likewise, we also have, there's the third error in understanding the world and understanding God is transmissionism, is that the only source that of anything that we can have is transmission, and there's no room for aql, for intellect in it. And so would it be fair to say that we have three sources of knowledge, transmission, reason, and observation, that the first Kalam 1.0, the Mu'tazila and the Mu'tazila were initially reacting to the rejection of literalists, or sorry, they were reacting to literalists.
Yeah.
They just reacted to literalists in the wrong way.
Yes.
Right? So it's like first to the market. You don't want, it's not always good to be first in the market, right? In any field, because you're going to make mistakes and you're going to be stuck on those mistakes.
Yeah.
The second guy's going to come around, see your mistakes, and pass you right by because he's not making those mistakes. So and this also answers the question of why early scholars rejected Kalam. They were rejecting the erroneous Kalam, the Kalam of the Mu'tazilites. That's what they were rejecting. That's right. Mu'tazilites came to fight the literalists. The Asha'ira Ghazali came to fight not just correct the literalists, but also the rationalists, the philosophers. Today, our main foe is those who indulged in observable knowledge, scientism, the naturalists, right? Which did exist in Ghazali's time, but they were not the main players. So you think that's a fair breakdown? Kalam 1.0, 2.0, and now 3.0, they're facing three different indulgences, essentially.
That's a good approximation, yeah.
Yeah. And there's one final question that I wanted to ask, or observation that I had. Actually, I think you actually answered it already. So let's talk about your course, the website.
Yeah. So I have a course called Why Islam is True. And this course was developed a couple of years ago. And I taught it to students, and then students started teaching it to other students. There are trainings, there's textbook, it's in Islamic high schools, there's a teacher training system for it. The next teacher training cohort actually begins at the end of this month. It's a female-only cohort taught by one of my students. And so if somebody's interested, they can apply. You can also go to whyislamistrue.com to learn more about this course. So this course, it is for the average, I want a human being, Muslim or non-Muslim.
Good.
It avoids polemics that are not. It avoids polemics. I don't think polemics are useful. So for the average Muslim, there's like real problems on the ground, and those are the problems that we should be focusing on. But it just focuses on La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, these four arguments, and it applies them to modern atheism. It applies them to the problem of evil. It applies them to the theory of evolution. It applies them to Christian arguments for design. It corrects those arguments. It gives you a evidence-based belief, and it gives you a language to communicate effectively with people in the world today. So the Kalam 3.0 project, it's still ongoing. It's like level 2. It's like the theoretical underpinnings of this, an explanation of that. But the place to go is the Why Islam is True, whyislamistrue.com. If you want to get a taste of it, you can go to QuranicCaseForGod.com, and there's a free video series that explains one of the arguments and also applies them to atheist objections. We also, we have a financial aid program. This is important knowledge, critical knowledge, so nobody is turned away for lack of funds. So if somebody can't afford the course, don't make that a barrier. You just communicate with us, and we'll work with you, inshallah.
Wonderful. We took up your time, jazakallah khairan, but this was so I remembered my final question. Do you want to respond to anything specifically regarding the podcast that we had with Sheikh Asrar and Sheikh Yasir Qadi?
I think we talked about everything.
Yeah, we talked about everything and how.
I just wanted to explain.
Yeah.
I just wanted to explain what it is. And this is, I think everybody has a good understanding about it
Yeah.
now. And anybody has any questions, they can contact me directly. I'm happy to talk to them.
Yeah, and just to summarize for people, the concept that Kalam the 3.0 has its basis with previous scholars like Sheikh al-Bulti or Sheikh Mustafa Sabri, or any development always has a gradation, right?
Yeah.
And it eventually solidifies. Today, you would be wasting youth's time, a young person, a regular Muslim's time, discussing the refutation of Mu'tazilites or the refutation of Aristotle. You'd be wasting his time. I think there is still a need to refute literalism within the Islamic Ummah. That still does exist. Maybe its major thinkers don't necessarily exist, but popularly it's out there. It's necessary. And it's definitely a fard. And I think everyone, from the people who sort of flirt with literalism to the Ash'aris, there is no doubt they come to the same conclusion that scientism needs to be refuted. It needs to be unpacked. Its false premises need to be highlighted with a flashlight so everyone could see, its error. And then Islam needs to have its own responses. We cannot be responding on a group of people. We sort of laugh at their theology, the inconsistency of the Trinity. With how can they be the leaders in responding to atheists? It makes no sense. They only started earlier than us, but I think as soon as we get to it, they'll be copying Muslim responses to scientism. But in the process, they will have to negate their own Trinity. And hopefully they come to realize that too. Because you can't use a tool or use a stool, okay, to get somewhere, and then as soon as you arrive, you kick that stool out and you say, no, we have no need for this tool, right? So that's exactly what literalism or the Christians have to do. And likewise, the mujassima within our ummah, if there are any, left in our ummah, I know most of them flirt with it, but don't necessarily, explicitly hold on to anthropomorphism, but they would have to do the same thing, right? Yeah. You use certain rational tools and certain amounts of reason and logic to disprove your enemy and prove Islam. Then within Islam, you throw those tools away. No, it doesn't make any sense, and it's not accepted. So, Jazakallahu khairan, and let's everybody try to go and take this course, benefit from this class. I thank you very much, Sheikh Hamza, for coming on, and I hope to have you on again in the future. Any new developments, new books, new videos, new courses that you have that shed more light on this subject, you just contact us and we will bring you right on, inshallah ta'ala. We are a Kalam-based live stream made for the common Muslim, and to have you on was perfect. So Jazakallah khairan again for your time.
Thank you for having me. Allah reward you.
Barakallah feek. All right.
Assalamu alaikum.
All right, everyone. That's okay. You can put my camera on. It's frozen, but that's okay. We are wrapped up, alhamdulillah. Thank you all for listening. I hope you all benefited. And I would like, inshallah ta'ala, for everybody to not forget our Umrah. We are taking youth to Umrah. I know everyone's been busy with Gaza, and of course that's deserved. But we are also taking youth to Umrah, and we need to do that fundraising. Let's take a quick look at where we are in the fundraising. Let's go to the Launch Good page, Umrah for Youth, and we're at 17 out of 25. I mean, if we can just get to 17.5, we're at 17,000 out of 25,000. The prices are out of this world for Umrah these days, and we took off. What we did is we took off over 1/3 of the costs for Umrah students, for high schoolers to go to Umrah to get a good experience of Islam, to see the Deen by its in its truest, deepest form. So we're at 17,000, and you could donate there at launchgood.com. All right, / Umrah for Youth. All right, you could look that up. we need your support. Omar, can you put that? We're not going to do the GRT right now because we're going to focus just on that. Could you put it in the chat? Umrah for Youth, launchgood.com/Umrah for Youth. Just put that link in the chat there. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. That's all right. There's no visual here anyway. So, all right. So, Jazakumullahu khairan. Hermit Ali says, shame about no Q&A. We can do Q&As later, inshallah ta'ala. But we'll do Q&A, some Q&A tomorrow about this. But essentially, I think we covered a lot of this subject. All right. Jazakumullahu khairan, everyone. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.